CPAC is documentary. CPAC, Politics in Action.
Hi, welcome to Beyond Politics. I'm Catherine Clark. Natural Resources Minister Joe Oliver grew up in a Montreal family that valued hard work and education. He received a degree in law from McGill University before deciding to pursue an MBA from Harvard, and that was a decision that changed the professional direction of his life. He went back not to law, but to Toronto into investment banking and had a long and healthy career in that field before he heard the siren call of politics. Joe Oliver was elected in 2011. He joins me now to talk all about his life beyond politics. Joe Oliver, welcome to Beyond Politics. It's really great to have you here.
Well, I'm delighted to be here.
You have a big job. It's a big job being a minister in a majority or minority or any kind of government. Is it something that keeps you up at night, or do you have a pretty balanced approach to how you get through your days as a minister of the Crown?
Well, it doesn't keep me awake at night. I'm too tired actually to be kept awake. But I guess because I didn't arrive at a young age to this, I had a lot of different experience that probably helped me get ready for something which was, of course, at the end of the day totally new, but
right.
but still I wasn't coming to all the ideas completely fresh, and so I've relished I've relished this year. It's been exceptionally interesting, which is not to say there haven't been enormous challenges and occasionally frustrations, but
right.
It doesn't keep me awake.
Well, you worked in a high pressure, fast paced environment for most of your career, and it was such an interesting career, which you did before you decided to run. And so I thought maybe you could tell me a little bit about what it was that you were doing beforehand. It was in the financial sector.
Sure. Yeah, I think it was Dr. Wilder Penfield who said that everyone should have at least 2 careers, and I doubled them up, doubled down on them actually. I started in Montreal. I got an arts and law degree, and I practiced for a short period of time. I then went to business school in the States with the intention of returning to Canada to practice corporate law, because at that time, shows how long ago it was,
yeah.
I would have been and subsequently became the only Quebec lawyer with an MBA.
No.
And now, of course,
really?
it's very
wow.
It's very common,
yeah, sure.
actually. So so I moved from that career to investment banking, because I sort of got caught up in the greed and glory of Wall Street and investment. And Merrill Lynch had just bought a Canadian firm that was headquartered in Montreal. So I thought this was a great opportunity to have that U.S. connection and yet return to Canada.
Right.
And so there's a whole story behind that. But I did get the position, and the intention was to return to Montreal, and then halfway through the year in New York.
Yeah.
Of course, they have to train you in New York because they thought that's where you're going to get the best training. And of course, that
probably
was the center
time,
of the financial
sure.
universe at the time,
yeah.
and still pretty much is. So they started talking about me as the man from Toronto, even before I'd made the decision, because the financial center of the country was in the process of shifting,
sure.
and they needed people in Toronto, and I was resistant at first, but it turned out to be the right decision.
So you talked about being caught up in the greed and glory of Wall Street, but there must have been something more to it than that. You had a career which you obviously found interesting enough that you wanted to further it by getting the MBA and
right.
being able to bring it back and continue practicing. But what happened when you were at Harvard that made you just think, I have to consider a shift now. I have to look at this other potential professional option?
I think it was because it was inherently more interesting to me. I thought the potential from a career perspective was greater, and I didn't want to be tied to the tyranny of billing by the hour,
right.
Whereas in this case you're leveraging yourself by using the firm's capital and by using the capital of the companies. So it seemed to me a much more interesting, broader scope type of activity.
Yeah.
And in those days it was extraordinarily unusual for a lawyer to leave the law. And in fact, in Toronto, it was only, I guess, into the 1970s that the first prominent lawyers started leaving the law to go into investment banking. I guess because they said, well, wait a minute, I'm as smart as these guys.
Right.
I'm working twice as hard, and I'm making a quarter of the money.
Right.
Plus, maybe it's not as interesting. So perhaps a career move is in order. I guess in a sense, I was at the leading edge of that kind of career move.
Did you ever consider, when you were getting that training in New York or when you were living in Boston, did you ever consider not coming back?
Yes. Actually, I thought about it for a while when they wanted me to go to Toronto, which is a city I really didn't know at all.
Okay.
I mean, those were the days when if a Montrealer would say that someone had never been to Montreal had no culture,
right.
But to go to Toronto was sort of a wasteland, and there's a little bit of truth in it, although it was exaggerated. So at that point, I was, wasn't too keen, and I thought about, staying in New York. That was a big, would have been a huge decision and changed, pretty well everything in my career. And
but also
at the end
a
of the
vibrant
day,
city, and probably New York would have been more, frankly, like the Montreal that you knew than Toronto would be. I mean,
but it was a global kind of a city from a financial point of view.
Yeah.
This was where investment banking was done,
right.
Along with London as a secondary place, and then other places like Paris and so on. So it was very tempting from that point of view, but I just wanted to come back to Canada. That's where my roots are. There was no anti-Americanism or anything like that about it. There was nothing negative in the decision.
Sure.
It was just I thought it would make sense. I thought I had a bit of a competitive advantage.
Yeah.
I knew the country, sort of part of my identity, and I wanted to do that. And I thought if I stayed, it was probably unlikely I'd return.
Yeah.
And so that was a major fork in the road. As Yogi Berra says, when you come to a fork in the road, take it. So I took it.
Are you glad?
Yeah.
You are.
Well, it worked out actually very well from a career perspective. One never knows what would have happened otherwise, but it certainly it was a happy. I've been very fortunate in my career.
So, you obviously enjoyed the career that you were doing, and you were very successful at it. And in an age where people sometimes question the motivations of politicians, I'm always interested why people make the decision to run. And in your case, you have this long, successful career. What got you active? Was it just in the past election that you started having political, or before the past election that you started having political intentions, or had you been involved politically before that as well?
I wasn't involved very much, a little bit. I just didn't really have the time. And then when I moved from investment banking to securities regulation and running the Investment Dealers Association, which was both an association that represented the industry and regulated it, I couldn't take a political stand, a partisan stand.
Yeah.
It was just impossible because I was meeting provincial finance ministers and premiers across the country, and the Bank of Canada, and the Minister of Finance, and so on. So I had to remain nonpartisan. But I always had an interest in politics. That was the part of the newspaper I always wanted to read first. I'd have to read the financial pages because that related to business. But social commentary in politics was something I I just was drawn to.
Oh, interesting.
So
Okay.
you know, and I had in the back of my mind, wouldn't it be great? It was one of those things.
Did you really?
Oh yeah, I did.
Oh wow. Wouldn't it be great to
did.
be an MP, or wouldn't it be great to what?
Well, to be involved, you know, politically.
Okay. Yeah.
And it just financially it wasn't possible. I was bringing up, you know, a family, and I just couldn't see myself, you know, breaking away from a career that I was doing quite well in. I mean, the financial sacrifice would have been enormous,
sure.
and the results would have been extraordinarily uncertain.
Yeah.
So I just, you know, put it aside as being unrealistic. And then, as my term at the Investment Dealers Association was coming to an end, you know, the contract extended the contract quite a few times, but I was there about 12 years, so it was coming to an end, and I got a call from a former cabinet minister in the Mulroney government, Tom Hawken, said, "Well, we're looking for candidates, and you know, would you be interested?" I knew him because he was running a sister organization, and you know, I was intrigued, I was flattered, and then I was sobered up quickly when I looked at the numbers.
You went and had a conversation with your significant.
Well, I did that. I think she and my kids were wondering what I would do, and were worried about it, frankly. So
and then the worst came true.
It was a reprieve, I think, for them. So I then looked at the numbers, and you know, I spent my career looking at numbers, and of course, at the end of the day, in politics, it does come down to numbers. You have to have more numbers than the other guy.
Right.
So it was a bit daunting. The first thing was to get the nomination, and you know, I didn't have any practical political experience, so I had to get out there, and you know, I formed some. I made a choice between ridings, and which was a fortuitous choice, as it turned out, but you know, based on a bit of analysis.
Sure. So you approached it with the same caution and that you brought to your career in the financial sector. Really, you looked at the numbers.
I mean, it was analytical, but I don't know how cautious it was. At the end of the day, you know, and you know, because I ended up going into a riding where we were 23% behind, and there had never been a Conservative elected, and there hadn't actually been in the entire city for 23 years.
It seems like a good choice.
So you give it a shot, and you know, then I got into the nomination, which is all about signing up members, and you know, I had the help of the former president of the Electoral District Association, so we worked very, very hard at that. So from the moment well, even before I actually left my current job, I was heavily involved in the nomination process. Then I got it, and then I started running, and you know, ran once and lost, and then won, and you know, moved the dial from 23% behind to 4% behind to 8% ahead. And in the meantime, I went over 35,000 doors, and you know, knocked on doors and reached out to different communities. It's a very diverse community in Eglinton-Lawrence, and so it was critical to reach out to, you know, to everyone who is accessible. So it's a tremendous learning experience.
I bet. Must have been completely different than anything you had ever done before.
Very different. As I said, you know, investment banking, the rejection of investment banking prepared me, but only slightly for door knocking. You know, because...
what were some of your best and worst memories of door knocking? Because it can be, I mean, people don't understand sometimes, if they haven't been politically involved, that you as a human being are going and knocking on someone's door at, you know, after dinner or before dinner or early in the morning, and you're getting people in their homes, and some of them are going to be really, really honest with you about how they feel, and can be terribly negative and critical. Some people, I would say probably the majority, are friendly and you know, will welcome you on their doorstep at least. But it's a very personal interaction. How did you find it?
Well, at first it was a little intimidating, and after a while it became strangely addictive. But
I understand that, actually.
You know, the reactions. Most people aren't that engaged, and you know, I started by by asking people what their issues were, and then I realized very quickly that I was putting them on the spot.
Right.
And if they couldn't come up with an answer right away, they felt as if they failed somehow.
So what did
that
you
was
do?
not a good. Well, I didn't approach it that way.
Okay.
I sort of introduced myself and talked, gave a very brief introduction of what what the issues at the moment were and what we stood for, and try to elicit a reaction from them, which was non-inquisitory, friendly, and let them answer or not, and feel comfortable, either way. Most people aren't into to a big discussion about politics.
Mm-hmm.
Others are tremendously. Most people aren't necessarily identified, with one party or another, and some people are to their core.
Yes.
And so, you can find that out
very quickly.
Very quickly. And we all have a lot of funny stories, but one of them, one of my favorites is somebody said to me, I have been waiting to speak to a politician. I have never been approached at the door, ever. This is my chance. I said, it's your chance. Now you can talk. He says, yeah, I've always wanted to talk. Well, I said, here I am. Let's talk. Well, I'm pretty busy now. So I said, okay.
Okay, well, this is a one-shot deal.
Yeah, I'll try to be back. So what can
I can't make any promises.
But some people are, pretty strong in their views, and you have to occasionally, disengage.
Did you ever have a sense when you were doing this, or something else leading up to one of your campaigns, where you thought to yourself, what have I done? Why am I doing this? This is crazy.
I don't know that I felt that, but I did say, my goodness, this is fairly intense work, because we went out in the snow, in the rain, in the heat, and in the sun. Now, the sun actually was a problem because you can't wear sunglasses. And I found it sort of painful.
Oh, that's
to
so
be,
interesting. Of course.
And people don't think of that because you can't walk. You knock on a door with sunglasses.
Right.
People think you're hiding something. It looks a bit
suspicious,
if not threatening. And,
yeah.
And when you meet women at the door, I mean, it's extremely important not to be intrusive.
Yeah.
You got to stand back at a certain distance and approach it. Your tone has to differ with the person. And it's not only men and women. I mean, you got to differ with the person answering the door, their age, and what you perceive as the type of personality. If someone opens the door, hi, how are you? Well, you can respond in kind. But if they say hello, well, that's perhaps the way you should approach the conversation.
That's very interesting. I have to tell you that, and perhaps it's due to a childhood of knocking on other people's doors, but I am very reluctant to wash off my makeup and put on my pajamas until the very end of the night, in case someone knocks on my door and asks for my vote or asks me what my concerns are.
But that says that you're willing to go to the door because you see the other side of it. And, but a lot of people, quite understandably, won't come to the door, and that's their perfect right, of course.
So let's talk about let's take a bunch of steps back and talk about what you were like as a kid. Did you, as a kid, think that this is where you were going to end up in terms of a career?
No, I couldn't have known that.
Did you have an idea of what you wanted to do as a kid?
Well, there was the choice between law and medicine. And,
were those the choices presented to you?
Well, kind of.
Or did you actually want to be a firefighter?
No. They were presented, and they seemed like reasonable choices, reasonable alternatives at the time. And I remember I went to to resolve this, I went to a vocational service, and I filled out all the forms. And of course, one of them was a preference test. But you could tell from the questions, what. I mean, I could have created an answer that was sort of obvious. So at the end, he said, I said, well, what do you think? He said, well, it depends what you want to do.
Nice.
And then, I was a little intimidated by the sight of blood, and apparently people thought I could talk a lot, or they put it a different way. So I figured loss for me.
Did you ever consider anything else, though?
Actually, not really.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So were these options that were presented to you by your parents then? I mean, were you basically told,
well,
this is what we would be very proud of?
I inculcated the values, I think, and you know, I mean, there was something. It's not relevant now, but you know, there were certain fields that seemed closed to someone who was Jewish. Certain the big corporations were not particularly open. So it's not as if I wanted to. No, well, we understood that.
Okay,
we learned
that.
I mean, it's not that I wanted to go there necessarily, and if I only could be accepted, I'd go there. I just, for some reason, you know, I didn't want to, but I knew that it would be perhaps a less welcoming environment, or not at all. So that's, you know, that's part of the. I mean, it's a bit of a joke, but it's also part of the reality. I mean, what are the ways to be successful that are interesting and challenging and you know, achievable and enriching. And you know, law, medicine. I mean, who could you know? I mean, that seemed pretty good. My father was a dentist at the time where that wasn't the road to riches, actually. And
your mom?
She was a teacher.
Okay.
Yeah.
Primary or?
Primary, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting.
So
you talked about your parents. I think it's on your website that you talk about them in terms of instilling in you values of hard work and that they emphasized education. Is that accurate? Is that
your
parents were?
That was at the core. I mean, the belief was, and I retain that belief, that education is absolutely important. First of all, it's enriching, it's interesting, it's something you always have with you, and you can build on it. And I think it makes your life a happier and more fulfilling life, and it also can advance your career. The fact, you know, that I had an arts degree, you know, and then law and then business. I mean, it's sort of I don't recommend that to everyone, but there were certain advantages in it. Clearly,
it's a broad base of knowledge.
Yeah, and it's been helpful, I think, in various ways, because you know, in investment banking, I remember at business school, it was extremely difficult for me the first semester because. You know, I was in a class with CAs and CPAs, and we were talking about accounting theory. And you know, there was a class in Bayesian statistic, probability analysis. I didn't know what a standard deviation was. Still not, you know. And so you know, it was very tough because there were people who had honors degrees in business, undergraduate degrees in business, and so they'd actually had all the courses, but once I got the technical stuff behind, I feel I had a bit of an advantage because they didn't have the other stuff.
Sure.
And I remember once I was convinced I wouldn't make it after the first semester. I was going to be gone. And you know, at Harvard, it's all the case method system, and you have to you get 3 cases a day, 5 days a week, 2 years. That's the program. And so you have to speak up in class. Sometimes they call on you, but you should really volunteer. So, you know, I didn't know what to say in accounting and you know, statistics. So there was a class in strategy. You know, so I put up my hand, blah, 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 blah. And afterwards, someone who had a degree in engineering turned to me and said, "Oh, boy, how did you know what to say?" I said, "Look, I don't need the sarcasm. I'm struggling. I'm hanging on by my fingernails. Please." Because I thought he says, no, I'm serious. I realized he was serious, you see. And I just thought this was just, you know, words that I was throwing in. But actually it was probably a little more than that, because I had acquired a certain facility for talking conceptually about issues which he hadn't really been exposed to. Maybe he didn't have a proclivity for it in the first place, which is why, you know, he started. His route was different than mine. And of course, that is now very helpful. Well, the blah 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 part. You know?
in every career you've held so far.
That's right.
You know, it must have also been a really interesting experience, a growth experience as a human being, to be someone who had already achieved degrees, worked, and then was put back in that position, which in some ways, only school can put you where you are made to feel like you're 5 again, and you're just struggling to hang on and figure out what's going on and learn. It is in some ways, it's a very humbling experience to go back into a higher education program that really challenges you to your very core. How did having to face that challenge and overcoming it, when you're saying you're hanging on by your fingernails, how did that affect you?
Well, it was really interesting. You see, the way law it was taught in Quebec under the civil law system, there was a great deal of memorization, and the bar exam was memory, actually. I mean, I'd had it with that, and I wouldn't have gone to business school if that had been the pedagogical approach. But this was totally different. I mean, you had to work very hard, but when the exam time came around, there was really nothing to study. You either had acquired the mental ability to, and the analytical ability and the approach to solving problems under uncertainty, or you didn't. So I rather enjoyed it, and it drew on some strengths that I had which hadn't been drawn on before. But it relates a bit to the politics. I remember somebody said to me, let's say halfway through my campaign, they said, we were really surprised that you went and took all these campaign courses, and you went to all the sessions, the training sessions, and so on, because you'd been president of this organization. We thought you wouldn't want to do that, and I was really surprised at the comment, because one thing you learn in business is not every business is the same, and you have to acquire the relevant skills. I mean, I don't believe for a second someone running one type of company can necessarily run another in a totally different industry without learning about that industry. So I had to learn a new trade, and it was absolutely obvious that I needed some help.
Yeah.
And when I started, of course, in Parliament, I was in a very steep learning curve too, and
you
have
like
to know that.
To walk in on that first day and to realize that you'd achieved it, and now what?
Well, the first point is I was extremely grateful that I got elected, and I mean it may sound trite, but it's true. It was a tremendous honor to represent my riding in Parliament. I mean, it's there's a feeling you get of some understandable pride to actually walk in. I visited Ottawa a lot of times. I could start tasting it actually from a distance, but when you're there, it's something totally different. So I was very pleased and honored by that. And then the Prime Minister appointing me to cabinet about a week or two after. The trip to Rideau Hall on the 18th was, that was an extremely moving experience. So
especially with your family too.
Yeah, it really was. I mean, what the backstory is, you wait for the call, and you don't get a call that says you're not getting in. You just don't get a call. Right. So I remember I was getting packed to go to Ottawa to take one of those training sessions that they give to new MPs, and the phone rang, and my wife saw it. She said, "It's Ottawa," and I didn't know whether it was the training session they were calling me about it. So I picked it up. Would you hold for Nigel Wright, who is the Prime Minister's head of the Prime Minister's office? And so I knew at that moment it was something.
What did you feel?
I felt pretty good, because I wasn't entitled to anything, but I certainly, I thought that it would be wonderful to get into cabinet, and I didn't have 30 years ahead of me, so I wanted to get on with it if there was going to be that opportunity. He talked a little bit about the election and congratulated me, and then said, "Would you be available to see the Prime Minister on Friday?" Yes. And so we.
And the rest is history.
Yeah, the rest drove up to Harrington Lake, and he told me. And
I really appreciate that you would take the time, and what I know is a busy minister schedule, to be here today and to chat a little bit about your life to this point. And thank you for being here.
Most welcome.